to it, I'm basically challenging that assumption because I fit in a school of thought that believes that the law itself is indeterminate and is subject, its meaning and application is subject to the political context, a balance of military, economic, and political power that really determines what the law means and looks like. So I use the analogy of the sail of a boat, that if you are in a boat without, oars or a rudder, you can't move. You need a sail. That sail is the law. But in order for the boat to move, you need wind, right? And the direction that the wind blows in is the political movement, right? So the law is the sail of the boat. The wind is the political movement. It will determine which way the law works, right? So my thesis is basically saying that law is politics, and to be leveraged for the service of an emancipatory purpose, it has to be used in a sophisticated service of political movement. Why? Because in about 100 years between 1917 and 2017, international law has actually done more to fulfill Israel's expansionist ambitions than it has to defend Palestinians. It is because of occupation law, not despite occupation law, that Israel has been able to increase its settler population in the West Bank from 200,000 in 1993 to 600,000 today, right? Under the false mythologies of temporariness and military necessity. So let me give you an example of one of the legal arguments that one of its legal architects has used, which is to say the occupation is not permanent, but it is indefinite. And indefinite means it doesn't necessarily end, but it can end, whereas permanent means it's there forever. So because this is indefinite, it's not permanent, therefore, none of these settlements are illegal. I mean, that's the argument that they're using. And then they say that Palestinians are not a juridical people anyway, so that they don't apply occupation law as a matter of fact. And under these frameworks have been able to expand a settlement enterprise that today are regarded by the United States as facts on the ground. That it's, don't look at international law, that's an impediment to resolving this. We have to just look at the facts on the ground and be pragmatic. Well, the facts on the ground is colonial violence, is precisely the problem. You're forcing us not to deal with the root cause of Palestinian grievances. So then what do we do? And I say, one, I think we need political movement. We need a robust political movement. The law is secondary. The law is not going to save Palestinians because it can easily be used against us. Even the ICC bid right now, the International Criminal Court, the first thing, if this goes through, the first thing the ICC will do is prosecute Palestinians. They're the lowest hanging fruit. So in order for on that example, I've been urging actually Palestinian legal advocates to wage a legal strategy, much like movement lawyers have waged. We know we have legacy of movement lawyering in the US. Think of the civil rights movement, one of the most significant. Wage a movement legal campaign where even if we lose in the courtroom, we are able to leverage this opportunity in order to win everywhere else and to mobilize politically.
So I wanted to ask you about that because, how are we going to reframe that conversation towards anti-Brown violence, towards colonialism, towards imperialism? Because as you mentioned earlier, I mean, the dominant narrative, at least in the United States, well, one, it's just protected by often, right-wing evangelicals who are the real driver sometimes in this debate in the U.S. But it's just like, this conflict is between Israel and Palestine, two actors. Who knows who's correct here? When in fact, this is, a systemic racism argument. So is that a more effective way to go about it? Because that's not how it's talked about here.
Well, I think that's exactly what Palestinians have been trying to do, right? The fact that they want to emphasize there is a power disparity. This isn't about an age-old religious conflict. This isn't religious. Palestinians regard Jews as people of the book. There have been Palestinian Jews, and many Jews still identify as this isn't religious. This is about colonization. This is about the transformation of Jewish religion into a juridical category that can be regulated by a state where literally the state of Israel has bifurcated Israeli citizenship as distinct from Jewish nationality, and benefits flow to Jewish Zionists through the category of Jewish nationality that gives them the right to immigrate at any time from anywhere in the world and claim citizenship and a right to belong, the right to employment, the right to college education, the right to rule, the right to govern, the right to be masters. Right. And so that's how those powers flow. And so Israel can say, oh, but we're a state of our citizens, which, by the way, they now say they no longer are since 2018. They say that they're a Jewish state only. But what's really happening is this flow of rights and privileges through a particular category. In any other context, no one would hesitate to call that out as racial discrimination. But the fact that it's because what seems to be happening is the collapse of Jewish religion with Jewish nationality, it makes people incredibly scared. Like, how can you speak and not be accused of anti-Semitism when the state itself has collapsed these categories? And one of the reasons that now we're seeing this pitched battle to even make it more so that anti-Zionism is equated to anti-Semitism, in my opinion, in the United States in particular, is because what ends up happening when we focus on Israel as the answer for Jewish liberation, which is a question, which must be answered, which is part of our framework of integrated and intersectional struggle, right? But what happens when you equate it to the state of Israel is that you obscure the conversation we should be having about white supremacy and how white supremacy has excluded Jews from the framework of whiteness historically, and has even denied them emancipation throughout Europe that culminated in a mass annihilation campaign. We're not having that conversation. Instead, it becomes deflected onto some age-old, primordial Muslim barbaric aversion to Jews, which for most people is much easier for them to stomach. I'm not that surprised. We can't even talk about anti-Black racism in the United States. So the fact that they can't recognize, people get offended. I'm a parent. Parents write into schools, I don't want anyone to talk about racism in the classroom. So I'm not surprised that people don't want to talk about white supremacy as a central organizing principle of government, and that Zionism flows from that and enables the U.S. To avoid the conversation while it protects Israel and expands its own, I would describe them as imperial interests in the Middle East.
I just want to get back just one more time to that programmatic thing. I mean, the idea of movement lawyers and cases that are waged less for their legal implications and more for their political implications. Michael Ratner from the Center for Constitutional Studies.
Oh, yes.
There was his memoir.
May he rest in peace and power. Yes.
I mean, that was very much his strategy. I think at the Center for Constitutional Rights. But ultimately, what does that program? What does that political program look like? Like, what is it exactly? In a concrete way, as much as one can at this point. What does that look like? Is it to expose the white supremacy and the imperialism that is, and the colonialism that is part of it? I mean, what is that?
First of all, as a former Ella Baker at the Center for Constitutional Rights, I'm a mentee of Michael Ratner. We are all beneficiaries of his brilliance and his dedication. And times when he has multiple times stood for what, Slava Žižek would describe as lost causes, right? And so thank you for lifting his name up. What is that political program right now for Palestinians? That's really the question. And Palestinians are trying to answer that themselves. Right? Because there isn't a united political program. The PLO, once it enters in 1968, the political program was a single democratic state for all people, right? Liberation of all of Palestine, single democratic state. It's a multi-ethnic democracy. Everyone can stay, right? By 1988, the Palestinians amend their constitution and change the political program so that they say, okay, we're going to recognize Israeli sovereignty over 78% of historic Palestine. We will establish a state in the West Bank and Gaza, but we will not forego our right of return either, right? And that's where we've been stuck, right? The Oslo Accords and the terms of Oslo. When I write the book, I originally thought I'm going to translate Oslo from legalese and make it accessible to people who don't, understand, aren't studied in law. But when I read through all the documents, I thought to myself, my God, you don't need to be a lawyer. You just need to be literate. This is a trap. This is a trap. There is no Palestinian state to emerge from this. Palestinians get jurisdiction over groups of people, but jurisdiction over no territory. What is jurisdiction over people without territory? That's a reservation, right? That was all that was promised. And so Israel's fulfilled its obligations, and that's what it tells us. And so now the political program, we're 1993 to 2021, 28 years? Is my math off?
It's good enough for this show.
Yeah, then we're in the same boat on that. We have damning empirical evidence that's demonstrated that this is a trap. Nonetheless, the Palestinian official leadership is still committed to this losing bet because it's the only card they have left. It's a stale leadership. They have sacrificed their entire life to get to this moment. Oslo was the only way they ever got to see their homeland again. So for them, they realize this, if they just keep trying, right, on faith, that somehow this is going to work out. And now you have I'm part of this different generation, right, that says, look, thank you for your sacrifice. You got us incredibly far. That's it. At this point, you're digging our grave. We need to shift course. And we've been describing it as an apartheid regime. We've been highlighting this as a Zionist settler colony. We have been calling for a one-state solution. We've been calling for just a different outcome. In my own work, I'm not concerned with the state solution, right? I'm concerned with understanding what does it look like for us to all belong, right? Where we're no longer concerned with who's master, but we are more concerned with who can belong. Palestine should be a place of refuge for everyone, primarily Palestinian refugees, but any other refugees that need to be there, right? I'm employing a different kind of imagination to ask Palestinians, to ask us, listen, rather than think about the return of refugees as the culmination of our freedom struggle, let's think of it as the beginning. Now that all Palestinians have returned, how do we make this a home for everyone? How do we offer Jews that stay, that can stay, that should stay? How do we offer them a better future than Israel has been able to offer them? The reason that we haven't been able to articulate and expand on these political programs, however, is because of the split, right, with the official leadership that remains intransigent and this, movement that's very robust, as well as the fact that we're living in dire conditions where it's about survival. And so there hasn't been, the ability, the support, the encouragement to be able to dream anew. We're stuck in a defensive posture with boots on our neck.
Noura Erakat, we will put a link to Jadaliyya and Justice for Some at majority.fm. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Emma and Sam. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, folks, going to take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll wrap this up. We are back, wrapping things up here. There is, I don't know that, from this distance we can see a change in the movement, and certainly there's a broader, I think, understanding that the two-state solution has time has passed it by. And so, I just, it is so discouraging to watch this